Believe it or not, a new year is almost upon us. Which is good because the old year is down to like 5% tread wear, which means that there's soon going to be no traction in the rain. I don't know about you, but I certainly learned a lot about writing in the last year, and I thought I'd share my top 5 learnings from the past 12 months. These are some shifts in perspectives that I've had, or realizations that have struck me like a bolt of lightning as I wade through the bitter hand-to-hand combat inside the trenches, which is fiction writing. So let's talk about some of the new writing-related information I've managed to cram into my brain over the past 12 months. Beginning with, introspection is not that bad, or at least not as bad as a lot of people will tell you. A very common piece of advice that I and a lot of other people adhere to is that your story should focus on action, dialogue, description, anything that isn't just characters sitting there thinking about stuff. There are good reasons for this. A wise writer once said that stories are about people doing stuff. And if your characters are just sitting around and ruminating or introspecting, then you miss opportunities for things like car chases or sword fights or sex scenes. All the sort of things that readers really like to read about. But character introspection, navel gazing, whatever you want to call it, does play a critical role in connecting readers with your characters. I covered this recently in the cinematic writing video a while ago, but I'm starting to realize how important introspection is and some of the techniques that a lot of great writers use to weave introspection in without a lot of people noticing. A lot of new writers are discouraged from writing introspection because some folks have a tendency to spend way too much page time having characters just sitting there thinking. This, I think, is still very good advice, but not doing any introspection can be just as bad as doing too much. And what I've come to appreciate, especially recently, is how well a skilled writer can weave introspection in with the rest of the story. You can write in a style that is very heavy on introspection, very close narrative distance, where we spend a lot of time in the character's head. And as long as you incorporate all of that introspection with other parts of the story, it will still work. I think the biggest thing that you can do here is make sure that any character thoughts or rumination that you're writing is relevant to the actions happening in a scene. When conversation with other characters makes that character think about their past and ruminate on events, that can work okay. When what the character sees as they move through the world, whether it's the trash lining an alleyway or the marvelous architecture of a palace, when that has an internal impact on them, and that impact and that introspection is triggered by the description that they're seeing and is linked to that description in some way, then that works. I think I haven't noticed this in the past because if you read a lot of well-written stories, the introspection is almost hidden. It is so closely linked to all the action and dialogue and description and everything else happening in the story that you don't really notice it. It's like the literary equivalent of spinach in your smoothie. So I guess a better way to frame this advice is not don't write introspection, but rather learn how to write introspection in a good way. That's really the advice that you and I and everybody should be following. Next thing that I've learned over the last year, writing advice is rarely correct 100% of the time, but certainty is very valuable. Writing, especially fiction writing, has this problem where basically anything you do can work when executed properly, and so giving specific prescriptive advice on do's and don'ts is a little bit futile. Another problem with writing is that if you want to get better at writing, sitting down to write is arguably like 85% of what you need to do. Yes, like things like reading for inspiration and getting feedback on your writing, or even absorbing information from videos or whatever, all of that stuff is helpful. But the number one thing you need to do if you want to improve as a writer is to write. Those two facts arguably negate the purpose of this and every other video that I've ever made. But I've noticed a very subtle nuance to this whole idea over the past little while that sort of changes things. If you want to get better at writing, you basically just need to sit down to write. You just need to keep showing up and putting words down. Yes, there's other things you need to do, but that is the number one thing, is just keep writing. But in order for someone to keep doing that, in order for somebody to put in the consistent effort that is required to improve at writing, you need to manage your own psychology along the way. You need to overcome things like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, fear, comparison with others. These are all internal mental things that will sabotage your writing. This is why writing advice, even if that writing advice presents certainty that maybe is actually in reality a little bit less certain, this is why it can be so valuable, because having mental certainty, a direction to where you need to take your story, can be very helpful for overcoming all of these psychological demons that are likely to pop up along the way. The point is not to capture the 100% scientifically validated way to write a good story. The point is to create a mental framework that provides the writer with a certain degree of certainty so that you can put in the hours necessary to get the work done. This false sense of certainty is arguably a bit of a delusion, but it allows you to overcome some of the mental difficulties, some of the internal stuff that will prevent you from writing, and makes the process a little bit easier and keeps you in the game long enough for your skills to develop. Almost any path you take with writing will lead to a good story eventually, but being guided along a specific path makes moving along that path a little bit easier. At least I think so. Next thing that I've come to learn over the last 12 months, you need to make your writing as obvious as you possibly can. By obvious, I mean clear, easy to understand, easily digestible, something that everybody can get right away, something that is very easy to pick up. Most of what you need to do with a story is to teach the reader things. Even if your story isn't meant to be educational, you still need to teach the reader things like who your characters are and what they want, what the setting looks, smells, and possibly tastes like, who the villain is and why they're bad. There's lots of things that your reader needs to learn. At the start of your story, your reader likely knows very little about these things, and you need to get them learning. You don't want to beat them over the head with the information, but at the same time, readers can have an incredibly difficult time picking up on things that might seem glaringly obvious to you, the writer. I've generally found through critique over the last year and having other people read my writing and reading other people's writing, I've really come to appreciate how much more obvious you need to make things in your writing in order to ensure that the reader understands what they need to understand. Yes, you can still go too far with this. You can spoon feed readers information. But in general, moving further than you think you need to towards spoon feeding or making things too obvious is usually a good idea, because the reader is probably going to have a harder time absorbing all the information than you necessarily might predict that they will. Clarity is an incredibly valuable commodity in a story, and that often means being more explicit with your information than you might instinctually be. Next thing that I've learned over the last year, small stuff really matters. This one is very short, but tiny little things like using commas correctly are so important. The effects that these little tiny things have on your writing is massive. I've always sort of known that these things mattered, but I've never really appreciated how much they've mattered. And the last thing that I've learned this past year with regards to writing is you have to pay the price of improvement. Not the monetary price, although sometimes it is that. Despite what advertisers will tell you, it is hard to get something without putting the effort required to get it. Nowhere is this more true than with writing. There are a lot of costs you need to pay in order to improve at writing. Writing will cost you time. You need to put the hours in to practice and improve. Writing will cost you your ego. You need to get feedback, potentially humiliating feedback, in order to learn what you need to learn. Writing will cost you effort and energy. It will exhaust you both intellectually and emotionally. Writing will cost you certainty. You will need to move outside of your comfort zone. You will need to push your limits and go beyond the places of certainty and familiarity. There are so many costs that come with improvement, and you need to be willing to pay these costs if you want to improve. Shortcuts and corner cutting won't get you there. Skill is paid for with time and sweat and dedication and occasionally blood, and you have to be willing to devote yourself to these things in order to improve. Speaking of devoting yourself to things, I'm going to devote myself to coming up with a conclusion to this video because I did not write one. So there you have it. I would love to hear about what you've learned over the past year with regards to your writing in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post 3 new writing advice related videos every week. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.